Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so excited to have this amazing conversation with you all. We're going to give people a minute or so to join us as you're coming in. If you can go into the chat and tell us where you're coming from, city, state. We have a lot of people from the whole country joining us, which is super exciting. As you all introduce yourselves and start putting your favorite foods in the chat. I'm so grateful for your attention and time today. We are going to have such a great conversation about such important topics here. So before we begin, I just want to take a moment to ground ourselves in the work we're doing together and how magical it is that we're coming from across the country to support ourselves, the educators around us, and their students and community who need us so badly right now. This topic is really close to my heart. I moved to the US when I was 10 from Colombia, and the challenge of finding a sense of belonging and coming to a country where you don't know the language, don't know anybody, is something I experienced firsthand and know what our young people are going through when they come here. I also had a friend that was deported when we were in high school, and that deeply impacted me and our friend group and just our whole community. So these experiences have given me a lot of personal understanding about the struggles our students are facing and the struggles our communities are facing. I feel really grateful to be able to have this conversation because you all are on the front lines working with our students and our communities day in and day out. This is why we do the work that we do. It's not just personal for me, it's also personal for organization. So I started Clayful about 3 years ago to help address the mental health crisis that everyone here is deeply aware of. Over the past couple of years, we've been supporting thousands of students across the country. And our motto has always been, let's support students where they are, when they need it, in the moment, because crisis doesn't just happen at Tuesday at 5 p.m. when you have the availability to talk to somebody. So by creating something really accessible at the palm of their hands, we've been able to support students outside of school walls and outside of school hours. And over the past couple of weeks, I've been getting calls from superintendents, mental health professionals about like, how can we support right now? And, because we've always leaned into supporting students right when I need it, it's beautiful to think about, okay, I've created this company and now I get to support students in a way that feels so impactful to me personally. So lots of emotions and lots of gratitude for being here. And even more excited to be with two incredible mental health professionals who I think are like the most thoughtful humans I've ever met and who are doing this work literally every day with our students. I'm going to introduce Amanda and Ashley here. Amanda is a bilingual psychotherapist and an educator specializing in trauma, family support, and mental health advocacy based in Virginia. Ashley is a high school mental health provider, social work educator. She's a writer and activist and very passionate about trauma-informed mental health care. Particular on youth identity development, suicide assessments and prevention, and politicized social work. And she's in Stockton, California. So we're going to get some really different perspectives on what they're seeing and also see a lot of the same things too, which I think is really magical. Our goal here is to create a community and really have this be the beginning of a beautiful thing that can grow over time. We're going to do that by focusing on the strategies that we can use to support our educators, support our students, and to also talk about what are we seeing to show that you're not alone and that there's so many other people that are working through the same things and hopefully help you build that empathy while also giving you that sense of community and support. Um, uh, Before we do that, I know you all have been chatting away in the chat. Just to give you a sense, we have educators in all roles and titles across 37 states here, which is so awesome to see. Lots of mental health professionals, lots of teachers, superintendents, school staff. So we have a packed virtual room, if you will, and they're going to have a great conversation. One final thing, we're not lawyers or legal experts. I know in the registration, a lot of you had really important, really interesting legal questions. Fortunately, did not pursue that path, so won't be able to provide legal advice. However, we will be sharing resources with you toward the end that community providers and other organizations have put together. So hopefully you'll at least have some resources to share with your schools. And want to also note that the organizations that Amanda and Ashley are employed by are not endorsing or affiliated with this webinar in any way.
Any additional things anyone wants to add before we get started? All right. So Amanda, why don't you start telling us, what are you seeing with your students?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, Maria. As you shared, I work in Arlington, Virginia, and our proximity to Washington, D.C. is very close. We live about 10 minutes from Washington, D.C. I'm the coordinator for a program that serves immigrant youth at the high school level. My program serves students who are newcomers to the country. And so, what I've been seeing with my students is increased anxiety. Fear of coming to school to the point where we're getting parents, guardians saying, I don't feel comfortable with them going to school today. I heard that ICE is down the street, and figuring out ways to support our students and our families, helping them attend school and giving them that sense of safety. Although it's really hard right now, students just not being able to sleep, saying, I couldn't sleep last night till 6 in the morning. And that's why I didn't come to school. Even though the program I work at with our newcomer students, I serve a school that has students from all different walks of life. I'm seeing students who are affected, who are undocumented, then children of parents who are undocumented. I work also with the friends and educators of those groups, and I could see the vicarious traumatization also for our educators and friends of this community. It's so hard.
Absolutely. In Stockton, on the other side of the country, over here in California, people think a lot about California as beaches. Folks in the chat definitely know that California has a lot more to it than beaches. And part of that is a tremendous amount of Latino members of our community that are farm workers, that are individuals who have been in California for decades and everything in between. I think that one of the things we're seeing is that the diversity of our community, particularly in Stockton, is creating a lot of that worry as well, because beyond the Latino community, we have a large immigrant population within our Stockton and Central Valley, Bay Area communities within California. There is a heightened sense of anxiety. I know Amanda spoke to absenteeism. There's a lot of worry about leaving parents, coming to school and not being around if something were to happen. There's also a lot of information that is stressful for students and they don't know what to make of it. So a lot of confusion happening. I have students who were born here, but due to executive orders are worried about their own safety and status. Students of federal workers are worried about the future of their families' financial well-being. And so those are really big elements that a lot of my students are bringing in. And I think a piece of that then that we're seeing in addition to just that expression of fear, expression of anxiety, and the behaviors you'd see to match that is increases in some of the smaller behaviors that you might see, just people kind of on edge. And that goes for our adults too on our campuses. And also one thing I'm a little bit worried about as things continue is a real decrease in our parent and community engagement because of fears or tensions about what it might mean to come to campus, which represents a system that doesn't feel as safe right now as it did.
Yeah, and this, like you're saying, it impacts the whole community, right? And all these different systems that we've built out over time in our schools start breaking down. In California, schools get funded based on attendance, right? So not only does this impact each individual student when they're not in the classroom, not learning, not advancing their growth, but also it can have systemic issues, right? I talked to a superintendent last week. He said 25% of his students didn't show up to school one day, and that can have huge impacts on the community and the culture, while also on the financial realities of a district, especially in a year where budgets and financial realities of districts have been a struggle for us across the country. So I'm curious, you talked a little bit about how these behaviors are showing up and the vigilance that you're seeing. Amanda, I remember you also talking about some examples of that and how to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And if we're not emotionally well, there's no way we're going to be able to learn. So anything you want to add there, either of you, around how this is showing up, particularly in the classroom, what your teachers are seeing?
I do think we're seeing, you use the word hypervigilance, and that's a word we throw around a lot in trauma work with young people. It's more than anxiety, right? There is that constant fear of looking over their shoulder. They're always ready to respond, but it also puts people into that fight, flight, freeze all the time, right? And we know that there are not only short-term impacts to focus and attention and sleep and all those elements, but there's also really long-term effects to our bodies staying in that heightened state of preparedness for a traumatic event. And so I think that's facing our students. I think that's also facing our educators because we love our kids. And so I think it's pretty clear that people feel ready in their body and their hearts and their brains to stand up for their students in whatever way that means. And so I think that's a kind of pervasive feeling that I want to name for educators too. I also think I'm seeing an overwhelming kind of sadness and heaviness. There are realities for families where rather than face the deportation process, family members are choosing to leave, or there's discussions of that happening, which are then coming into the therapy spaces. We're seeing that pre-grief or a lot of feelings coming with that. Finally, on a therapeutic level, I've seen a significant increase in kids checking me out, right? And I'll name, I'm a white practitioner, so they've got to check me out, and they need to understand that I am a person that has really specific beliefs before they're going to open up to me. And I'll talk later about some of the ways that I, in non-political but very clear values statements, share what I believe with kids so that they do feel that sense of safety.
Yeah, I just want to add that the way I think I'm also seeing it in our school is a heightened sense of feeling like they're being targeted. For instance, in Virginia recently, there was a new policy on no phones. And I have students who are saying they're always telling us that we have to put our phone away. But the students who are white, they're not saying that to them. And then when we look at the report and whose phones are being taken away, the data is not showing that. But as you mentioned, Ashley, it's this hypervigilance. Am I being targeted? One thing that I constantly talk to our community, our educators about is that the brain can't learn if we are in that trauma state, right? If we're on fight, flight, freeze. When everything is calm, students can focus, they can listen, they can learn. But when there's stress, fear, danger, the brain goes into survival mode instead of learning mode. I think that's where a lot of our students are, and even a lot of our educators. And I think creating the spaces for that is important.
Yeah, and just like you're saying, naming it and all being aware of what's happening. In a lot of the registration forms, I got a sense that maybe it's not a large part of your community that's being affected. So maybe schools or districts haven't talked about this yet, but having some of this information on like, how does this affect the brain? How does this affect how students are showing up? Can really help you advocate for, hey, let's establish some resources, or let's share something, and we'll get into how you can support and what are ways that systems can support to really help students go from survival mode to learning mode. I hope this has been a helpful empathy building exercise, but also you're not alone, right? We're in this together. And I hope a lot of those things that both Ashley and Amanda noted resonate in what you're seeing in your community too, because now we get to jump into how do we actually support through this, and what are ways that we can help. So Amanda, why don't you kick us off with some of the things that you've done? And I really love how tangible some of these ideas are.
Yeah, yeah. Some of the things that we've done, that first week after January 20th, felt students were constantly coming to my office, crying, upset. Educators, teachers were as well. We did a community meeting, but before that, I talked to our leaders in our program, our student leaders, and I said, I really need you to lead this. Our principal met with the leaders and said, our schools continue to be a welcoming and safe space for you, and share the messages that we had gotten from our school system to our community. And we did that in a community meeting. It was about 50, 60 students and staff, a lot of the teachers of the students. And we went around, and after the students and our administrators shared the the policy and what had been put out by our school district, I asked the teachers to, who could stand up and say that they're a trusted adult if a student needed to talk to someone. And teachers got up and said, I am someone you can come and talk to. I support you. I'm here for you. I thought that made such an impact on our students because they need to hear that, and it needs to be said explicitly. Another thing that we did is I have a great relationship with our police department in Arlington, and I invited them to do a talk on know your rights. They talked to our students about understanding their rights, telling them that they're there to support our community. They said, we work for you. We do not work for ICE. We work for you. We work for your safety. Another time during lunchtime in my office, one student asked, has there really been an increase in raids in Arlington since January? And the police was like, no, the numbers are not, like, nothing has increased in our community. They're like, oh, but we're seeing this, we're seeing that. And so the police was able to clarify just some rumors. And I think that was so helpful. And I think, again, creating the spaces, we have our DEI coordinator at our school who also leads a lot of community circles. And she recently shared something very powerful with us. She said, you can create opportunities for circles with a small group, like 2 students. And she says that she tells them, go around and share something that worries you or concerns you today. And then share something that helps you cope with this challenge or worry. Right. So that's really tangible. And then in this educator meeting where we were talking about supporting each other, this elementary school teacher said that she's providing a lot of opportunities for students to turn and talk to each other, just checking in with each other. And she said something so simple yet so powerful. She said that she tells her kids, in this classroom with me, you are safe. I had her write it down, and I wrote it down for myself too, because I was like, I can say that, I can write that, somewhere in my office. In this office with me, you are safe. So those are some of the things that have been helpful for our community.
Building on those are beautiful. Sometimes those simple things are the thing. One of the questions that comes is, how do I tangibly talk to my teachers in a non-political way to remind them what we're here for? One of the things we're really encouraging in our school community is having direct conversations, school leaders with their teachers, to really remind people that as educators, we sign up to promote student learning, to promote safety, to promote wellness. No matter where we are on the political spectrum, we agree about that. And if anybody doesn't, that's a different conversation, right? There are no exceptions to which students deserve to learn, to be safe, and to be well on our campuses. Naming that in shared spaces in explicit ways has had a calming effect on kind of the looking around and who believes what and that kind of thing, and brings us back together as a team. I think another policy related shift that's really important is thinking about, if your school policy is something like there are absolutely no phones on this campus, are there exceptions when a student might be taking a call from a parent and they're in that heightened state of fight, flight, freeze, worried that could be the call, right? Or a call that's really potentially upsetting for them. One, do we have exceptions? Two, do we have a plan to support students after those conversations if they were to happen? And getting ahead of that and making sure that it's not a one-off, like this teacher allowed this phone call to happen because it was an exception, but that as a team, we have an understanding that right now, sometimes our policies are not made for everyone, and we may need to think about that. Another really tangible thing is, as I was kind of indicating earlier, this idea that young people will, and adults too, will kind of test where you are on both the political spectrum, but also just what are your beliefs about me? And so my go-to statement incorporates belonging and then just reminds students what I value. And so I say something like, I believe every student on our campus belongs here, and they deserve to learn to be safe and well on our campus. It becomes pretty clear where I stand when I share that with students. It has an immediate calming effect of like, okay, You think I belong here, and I know what that means. Along with that, you can do a lot of signaling within your spaces, right? I have Know Your Rights cards in my office. There are Know Your Rights posters up in my office, as well as, I know we're talking a lot about our immigrant community, newcomers, and that sort of thing. But I think it is equally important to name that our LGBTQIA plus population is also really struggling right now and very attacked. And so making sure that we are very clear about our sense of welcome, that people belong here in our spaces, is something really important. The final thing I'll share is Amanda really indicated something very important. Students will have behavioral things that come up that look different than what we might expect from them. So the other thing that we're offering is talking to our educators about really leaning into things like what we'd call defiance in the classroom. I see it in 3 steps. I ask my educators to reflect out loud what just happened, to connect with the student, and then to invite them to share something. So that might look like, let's say I've asked a student to move seats and they tell me no. Okay, I see that what I said may have gotten you really upset, or you might be having a really big reaction to that request. That's the reflect, right? I'm saying what's happening out loud. Also, not in front of everyone. Small caveat, right? Like in a private conversation. The connect is like, this usually isn't how we talk to each other or relate to one another. So I've now connected, like, this isn't us. And then I'm going to invite that student to tell me something. Did I miss something? Was there something that happened that I didn't get about this? And maybe that student shares with me, to Amanda's point, I am the only brown person in this classroom and you asked me to move. And 4 other people were talking, right? And now I'm able to get in there and repair if that's what's needed. And I might adjust my approach because I know something now about how they feel. And that matters to me as an educator.
I love that because it makes it so tangible, right? And I know, Teresa, you're sending some stuff in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing resources. After this webinar, we're going to take a lot of these strategies and put them into a blog post, and we'll share that with you. So for those of you that are writing notes, you will also be getting some written strategies from us, because our goal really was to give you some very tangible things that you can do and share with your colleagues too, that make it just even a little bit easy to have these conversations. Now I want to lead into that part of the work, right? Like our educators, everyone here is doing so much to support students, to support the community, to support your colleagues. How do we make sure that we're not, burning out, and that we can stay in it to support everybody else? What advice do you have for our educators?
I can begin answering that. I had a personal experience a couple of weeks ago where I felt really overwhelmed by the news. I was trying to do my best to support our students, but at the same time, myself, right? I was feeling a lot of anxiety. And I remember calling a friend early in the morning on my way to work. And I said, I can't believe this is all happening. My students are in such a state of fear. They don't want to come to school. And I was just really upset. And I remember her saying, she's an educator herself, and she said to me, you need to see this in a way as like, there's people in the water and they're drowning. Do not get in the water with them. If you get in the water with them, you're going to drown. And she's like, what I'm hearing you right now is you're drowning. You need to stay ashore so you could throw life jackets. You need to stay ashore so you can help others, because if you don't do that, you're not going to help anyone. And that really stuck with me. And it still comes and goes, right? Like the other day, I was at my daughter's cheerleading game and basketball game, and I started feeling this kind of like flight, like, because I've been doing so much and just thinking and all these things. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm overthinking. I'm drowning. Let me see. What can I do to help myself? Let me take some deep breaths. Let me just notice what's in this gym, in this space right now. I need to turn off the news. I'm not going to see any updates for today, So really noticing that really resonated with me, and I can sense when I'm getting in the water and what to do to stay ashore so I can continue to be helpful for our students.
I love that so much. As potential activists, if you're listening and you're a potential activist, if you're in the water, it's a lot harder to swim upstream and find out who's throwing people in the water, right? So we got to stay out of there so we can take a little hike and figure out how we can stop people from getting in that water. The other piece that this webinar really speaks to that I think is so beautiful is that when I'm sitting there doom scrolling and reading every article about all the executive actions and different things that have happened in that day or people's Twitter posts, I'm alone. But when we're here talking about this, problem solving, thinking together, growing together, reminding ourselves of the most important things, which are that we adore these kids and their families and our communities, that has so much power to it, right? People would like us to stay at home doom scrolling by ourselves because that is really scary and it's a really difficult place to be in. And so don't stay there, right? Come to these sorts of things. We'll put some resources around different ways that you can even join some support groups, right? Amanda and I are going to team up and we're going to have a coast to coast group of folks who might make this a little bit more of a regular brainstorm, depending on how these next few years shake out. And so join us, join other groups so that you don't feel that sense of isolation in this, because there are a lot of us across this country and we love kids and that holds power.
I love that. I just want to stress again the importance of creating your community and creating partnerships with allies and advocates in your community. Just a couple of days ago, I facilitated a meeting with educators in our community, and so many showed up, and it was heavy, but it was also so inspiring to hear the passion we all have for our community. Also, a couple of weeks ago, one of our community members put an Amazon wish list for our students to help them deal with anxiety. These breathing bears that change colors as you go in, breathing in, you hold it, you breathe out. It was just amazing to see in the short time that she had put that Amazon wish list, the number of donations we received from our community. I was like, our community cares. I cannot stress enough how much it's helped me to connect with others and to form these allies. I have organizations saying, tell us what you need. How can we help? That just feels like I'm not alone in this. I felt like that in the beginning, especially because I serve 100% immigrant youth.
Yeah, and then that was the goal of bringing this community together, right? To start and continue a lot of that important work. I know there's likely a couple of questions that people have been holding back, so would love to open it up if you all want to submit to the Q&A and we can have some time to answer questions. I will start with one that came up quite a bit during the registration, which is how do you as an educator show up for your community when your district or school hasn't necessarily put together a formal policy or guidance around it. I'm going to share my screen. So if you all want to screenshot, take a picture, or I'll send this in the blog post as well. It's really important to know that if you're an employee of a school district or a school organization, you must adhere to your employer's policy and guidelines when engaging in discussions on this topic. We see things that happen on social media and how educators get kind of dragged through the mud, and we don't want that for anybody. But at the same time, we know it's important to stand up for our students. If you do wish to express personal opinions that don't align with your employer's stance, you should do so in your capacity as a private citizen. When talking with community organizations, they might be able to do things that you as an employee of your district cannot. And that's where finding your allies and community leaders can be impactful. There's a certain language you might be able to use, especially if a family member, a community member asks you directly what your stance is or how you think about this. The ones that you share directly for students are really powerful. This one is more for families. You don't ever want to make this political, right? We have people from all beliefs and we want to make sure that we go back to supporting all students. That's why this is here. It's all about supporting all students and knowing that all students deserve to learn and be well. So I wanted to share that because it is something that came up and hopefully it gives you a little bit more clarity around how you can navigate in a community that may not already have strong guidance.
Out of the BELSO ad, there's so many know your rights trainings that are happening across the country right now. Community colleges are a really great resource. Local organizations are a great resource. As a private community member, find one. Because one of the best things that we can do is to know the rights of our community members, of ourselves, and carry those red cards in your purse or in your pocket. Hand them out everywhere you go, because the more people that have that information, the less that becomes a one-off, right?
Definitely. So on that note, I'm going to share some of the resources here, and I'll put these, I'll just copy and paste this, whoops, in the chat as well. And we'll send this out after. But the idea is, like, Aspire has put together some wonderful toolkits. Thank you, Ashley and team, for letting us share that with the community here. The Know Your Rights one-pagers. And there's a lot of organizations that have put together toolkits that have broad reach. So we'll share that along with you. There are some tools that we've put together that we use regularly with students when they're feeling really deep emotions. Simple tools, right? Like grounding, breathing, ways to fall asleep. Our nervous systems are all the same, right? They get heightened and they need relaxation and air to survive. So the same tools that you use with your students, you can use with yourself. Getting in the habit of using those grounding techniques, getting enough sleep for you. And like Teresa's saying in the chat, like stay informed, but also disconnect, right? Find ways for you to build your coping mechanisms. It's really important for you to be able to stay in this, stay outside of the water. And the more that you use these tools, the more that you can also support your students in using these tools, right? You got to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk as well. There's a question in the chat. How would you advise people, families, educators to create local spaces for community, maybe within schools, when sometimes our vulnerabilities and most vulnerable parts may limit us from seeing everyone else's needs? That's very deep. How do we help see that everyone's fight is everyone's fight? Beautifully worded. Thank you for sharing that. Ashley, do you have a thought on that? Yeah.
I mean, probably not as deeply profound as the question itself. I think there are always going to be needs that rise and ebb and flow, right? Naming that these are students who are not only at risk, they're experiencing trauma that needs to be addressed, but I think also being able to demonstrate how that affects the entire community is a way that we can support justifying that. And I think there's always competition for resources in support and what gets the most attention. But I also think that in this moment, by not supporting these groups that need the most attention, especially as mental health practitioners, we can very easily make the case that there are lives at risk. This level of stress, this level of trauma, naming, for example, outside of the immigration related conversation, our LGBTQIA plus community of students, they are at tremendous risk. And so we have an ethical imperative at this point to provide those services, full stop.
Yeah, and I think just going back to, we're all here for the same reasons, right? And like as educators, this is what we signed up for, and reminding ourselves of that showing up for one person does not mean you're not showing up for another person, right? Like these are all our students and they deserve love and support and to have a safe space to learn. So I definitely agree with that. I know we're almost at time here. So I said at the beginning that this was the beginning of trying to build this community. We'll send a bunch of the resources after. And we are going to be leading a book club. This is one of my favorite books, In the Country We Love by Diane Guerrero. She's Colombian, so I'm biased. But she was born in the US. Her parents got deported when she was in high school. And this book tells a story of her journey and what it feels like to come home and not have your parents be there anymore. So I think it's just such a powerful story, and the way that we can, as educators, like really lean into what our students feeling while also being in community to figure out how do we help them and how do we help ourselves is really powerful. So I'll send the link in the chat here to sign up, and we'll also send it out in the email after this with all the resources. But would love to see some of all of you again, and thank you for sharing in this space with us, for learning. And I hope this filled your cup just like it filled ours.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Maria and Clayful. This is a great opportunity to come together, and we really appreciate that.
Oh yeah, I'm so glad. It's been an honor. Thank you all. Hope you have a great rest of your week and a happy Valentine's weekend for everybody.